garter stitch can easily be grafted invisibly. And I've got a little project that you can knit if you like. It's a Mobius scarf. You need some worsted weight yarn. I used 2 balls of Lion Brand Amazing, which is worsted weight. They're 50-gram balls, 1 3/4 ounces, so it doesn't take that much yarn. I just thought this was fun and pretty. Sometimes when you're at the yarn store, you'll see an interesting novelty yarn, and it'll be the last, and you can pick up just a skein or 2 inexpensively. Now, you need a gauge of 4 stitches to the inch. Use whatever needle gives you the gauge. I used a US size 9. I'm kind of an average knitter. You end up, by casting on 45 stitches, you end up with a strip 11 inches wide, and you need to keep knitting until it's 28 inches long. Then you are going to make sure that you stop knitting at a certain point, which I'll describe in a minute. Now, I started knitting by casting on some white waste yarn, and then I started right in because I need open loops for the graft. I ended knitting with some waste yarn also. I think I have 6 rows of waste yarn after the knitting. Now, the tricky bit about ending, I'm going to explain. This is going to be assembled with 1 twist in it. That gives us the mathematical Mobius shape. It also gives us a thick part that goes in front to keep your neck warm, and then you're going to have this scarf that can be pulled up over the head and keep your ears warm. Now, you have to stop the knitting part before you start the scrap yarn. You've got to stop it in such a way that the beginning of the knitting has these little purl bumps, and the end of the knitting has these little knit grooves. In other words, this shows the little bits of the garment yarn in between the white waste yarn, and this shows the little bits are on the back, and the front, all you see is kind of a clean color change. Now, it's quite possible, if this were upside down, to get the opposite effect. You could have this twist so that this side has the grooves and this side has the bumps. Doesn't matter. They can't be the same. It is not going to work if this one has bumps and this one has bumps too. They won't go together correctly, and you won't have an invisible join. You'll have a nice looking join, but wouldn't you rather have an invisible join? Now let me get in really close and show you the sewing part of the job. Before I stopped knitting with my colorful garment yarn, I had this bit of extra yarn for sewing up. Now, to do a graft, you typically need 3 times the width of the fabric, and there's 3 times and a little bit for luck. I just hate running out of yarn in the middle of a graft. I'm going to thread that in this pink plastic blunt needle. I do all my grafting with blunt needles. Oftentimes I use the metal ones. The yarn comes from right here, and as is typical with grafting, what you want to do is you want to take your stitch, your first stitch, into the other piece. So if it comes from this piece, you take your first stitch into the other piece. And as happens with a lot of grafting, if you just follow the waste yarn, it'll show you where to go. So I am going to start over here by tunneling through this stitch right here. And then I'm going to go over here. Now this is a dent row, and in a dent row you have to pick up legs, a knit row in other words. So on the purls where we're getting the bumps, we're going to tunnel through, just go under a bump. But on the knits, we're going to pick up legs. So here I am getting my bump and drawing the thread up. This is my starter stitch. I have to be pretty gentle with this yarn. It's kind of a furry yarn. And then I pull this open And I find my first pair of legs, and they are right here. And I put my needle under both legs. And then I'm going to adjust the length of my stitch once I pull up all this yarn, folding my waste yarn under, and adjust my stitch to about the same tension as a row of the knitting. Now, I've gone under 2 legs on this side. On this side, I'm going to go through the bump again. Remember, you always reuse yarn on the trip to the other side, and then you go to a new stitch. So use stitch, new stitch, and that is the 2 loops I go through on this side. Definitely a little challenging using such a furry yarn. Now I go over to the first side and just sort of pull it open and figure out where my yarn came from, and it came from right here, and I want to get the next 2 legs. Do you see the 2 legs? So I've got those, and I will pull up. Then on this side, tunnel under a bump. Oh, I didn't pull up enough. Let's just adjust that. Tunnel under a bump. See that? And I'll just pull up a little ways and then tunnel back under the next bump. I think you can see where I went. So, the side of the knitting that has the bumps, you're going to only use bumps. The side of the knitting that has the legs, you're only going to use legs. How simple is that? So over on this side, I go under 2 legs and draw that up. Then over on this side, I want 2 bumps. Used bump, new bump, and draw that up. On this side, I go under 2 legs and adjust the length of that stitch. On this side, 2 bumps again. See how that's coming together? And I can really get a pretty good look at my tension. And it looks pretty good. And then 2 legs on this side. On this side, bump and bump. Oops, let me get this yarn drawn through. Just check my tension before I go on. And now back on this first side, 2 legs. And then over here on what I think of as the purl side, my 2 bumps. Back over here, 2 legs. And back over here, 2 bumps. Very simple, rather repetitive, so I'm going to do the rest of the seam and come back, show you the invisible seam, and explain the whole idea of the Mobius having only one side. Now I'm finishing up the last few stitches. I end up with just one leg that I can go in, and just for good measure I'll run back into the other side. Now I'm hiding the end. I'm just weaving it in like I was grafting, only on another row. I'm following the path of one of the other strands of yarn a little farther up on the scarf. that's enough. And then finally, it's necessary, gee, that one's a little bit too big. Let me fix that. After I clip this yarn, I'm going to flip this around the other way and get the waste yarn off. This is the same job as it always is, getting the waste yarn off. One end will unravel quite nicely, and the other end will have to be clipped and picked at. So there's one end of my waste yarn. It might catch occasionally where I have split the yarn, but I use scissors to help with that. There's another spot. Split the yarn, just a tiny strand. So that takes one piece of waste yarn out. I can pick this yarn out here, but I can also go to the other end and give it a clip with my scissors. And once I have a big enough piece to grab, I can pull on it. Sometimes, if you're lucky and it doesn't catch anywhere, it comes off as easily as that. Now let's have a look at the completed Mobius scarf. Here's my finished Mobius scarf. My graft is right here in this blue and orange area. You can't even find it except that I see a little bit of extra thickness where I had to hide some ends. And so that it's got 2 threads instead of 1 for a few stitches. It goes over the head right here. So you put this over your head, and this area goes under your chin for warmth. And then if you need it, this part can be pulled up over your head for a warm hood. Now, the whole concept of Mobius mathematically is that it has only one side. It's a circle, but it's got a twist in it. And let's say that you're thinking of this as the outside of the scarf. So that's the outside. If you follow that around, it would be back here, and then you come around here, and what do you know? You go inside. And then I'm inside, over to here, inside, under here, inside here, and what do you know? I come up, down here, and I'm outside where I began. So if you trace it with your fingers, you find yourself on the same side again. Just a really interesting shape. So you see that you can easily graft garter stitch in a beautiful invisible way.